On January 17, 2010, Chile's presidential runoff yielded a result not seen in a half-century. The conservative candidate won. This week on Dialogue, Chile's right turn. Hello again, and welcome to the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars in Washington, D.C. I'm John Molesky. Each week, Dialogue explores the world of ideas and issues in international affairs, history, and culture. Once each month, our Wilson Spotlight segment focuses on the work of one of the center's programs. And this month, we look at the work of the center's Latin American program with a discussion on the regional implications of Chile's recent presidential runoff election. Our guests for the discussion are Cynthia Arnson, director of the Latin American program, and Leonardo Avritzer, a professor of political science and a former Wilson public policy scholar. Cindy, Leonardo, welcome to the discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy to be here.
Before we get into the advertised subject matter, I want to spend some time talking about the Latin American program, Cindy. Sure. And so if you could just give us the brief overview, tell us about the program.
Sure. Well, we focus on the issues I think that are the most of greatest concern in the region, questions of democratic governance, of poverty and inequality, of rising crime and violence and rates of citizen insecurity, including organized crime, and also on questions of the trade relationship that Latin America has with the United States and with other countries within the region and around the world. So we look a lot at Latin American foreign policies and its alliances and relationships with countries outside the region, such as China and increasingly Iran. And there are also special programs that are devoted to Mexico and to Brazil. We have separate institutes that I think reflect the importance of those two countries as global powers, but also in terms of their importance for the bilateral relationship between the United States and countries of the hemisphere.
I know at one point, for example, the Brazil Institute was the only institute in town exclusively dedicated to the study of Brazil. Is that still the case?
It still is. It still is. There are people certainly who specialize on Brazil that are part of larger institutions, but it's really the only place in Washington that focuses all of its attention on developments, political and economic developments within Brazil, and also on key factors in the dynamic between Brazil and the United States.
Tell us a bit about the types of programs that you produce and conduct. I know, not coincidentally, our guests today just did a book event here at the Wilson Center, and that's one example, but talk to us a bit about the types of things you do and how many you do a year, who your audience is, those types of things.
Sure. Well, we try to bring primarily Latin Americans to Washington to provide perspectives that would not otherwise be heard.
First-hand sources.
Exactly, and there's really a wide range of people, from governments, from civil society organizations, from think tanks, from universities, and we try to connect those people, given their specific areas of expertise, with the relevant policy audience in Washington, and I think we've played that role very well. The Latin American program is the second oldest program here at the Wilson Center.
How long has it been in operation?
Since 1978. Wow. So it's really been around for some time, and has played a key role in providing Latin American intellectuals and thinkers with a place to be heard and seen in Washington, and we're very proud of that role.
And in addition to the live programs or print publications, we have one here. Mm-hmm. I'll grab this and you can tell us what it is. I'll hold it up so people at home can see it.
Sure. Well, our principal audience is here in the United States, but we have also a big audience in Latin America, and so there's some portion of our publications that appear in Spanish and have a wide readership, throughout Latin America.
And finally, give us a preview of something that you have coming up that people can be part of if they choose to.
Well, we will have coming up in a few months a seminar that will bring people from all over Latin America that will look at the relationship between common crime, in the region and the relationship to organized crime. And this is, I think, a growing problem and is seen by many governments in the region as a growing threat, to democratic governance. Certainly in Mexico, we've seen an explosion of violence related to narco trafficking, and then the spread of that phenomenon throughout Central America and areas of the Caribbean. And so we will be looking at ways that that organized crime comes in and takes advantage of existing criminal networks that exist, whether they are youth gangs in Central America or illegal organizations organized or involved in human trafficking, illegal immigration, contraband of various types. And we'll be looking at coming to a greater understanding of how it is that organized crime is able to take root in a society. And I think, the hope, at least, is that we'll have a better idea about how to stem its growth and its penetration throughout the region.
Great. Thank you for that overview. Sounds like a very full plate that you're working on right now. Before we delve into some of the specifics about the presidential election and the regional implications, I want to spend a moment on terminology. When in my open, I talked about the right, the return of the right or conservative. Leonardo, let me ask you, when Americans think of right, left, or conservative, liberal in the United States, are we talking about similar types of political dynamics when we look at countries in Latin America?
Not necessarily. What we have in Latin America are different traditions. When we think about the left radical tradition in Latin America, if we think about Evo Morales, for instance, I don't think that we have anything similar in the United States. But when we think about the more consolidated democracies in the Southern Cone, Chile, Uruguay, and Brazil, I think there is some resemblance between what we call left politics, right politics, liberals in Latin America and in the United States.
Certainly the new president sort of fits an American model for conservatism or right-wing, businessman, a billionaire even, a man who believes in an entrepreneurial approach to governance.
Yes, but it's important to have in mind that this is an important change in Chilean politics because Chilean right-wing forces were the ones very much connected to Pinochet and to the authoritarian regime. When we see Piñera today, we see also a new generation of right-wing politics in Chile in the sense that he's younger, he's entrepreneur. Usually, right-wing politicians in Latin America don't come from business. They come from very conservative oligarchic sectors or from the military. In this respect, Piñera is also new.
So he's sort of some sort of new creature in that regard, a new political creature emerging.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah. Cindy, along these conservative, liberal, or right-left paradigms, a lot of observers of American politics say that there really is no left wing in the United States the way there is in other countries. You have socialism and things like that that manifest in political movements in Latin America. So again, providing perspective for our U.S. viewers, can you talk a bit about that? When we talk about left-wing politics in Latin America, we're talking about something very different.
Sure, but we're not talking about really a unified phenomenon in Latin America. I think the left-wing social democracies that you see in Chile up until now with the last election in Chile and Uruguay and Brazil resemble more social democracy in Europe in its European form, where you have a very high respect for institutionality, you have strong political institutions, but also a strong state that is involved in forms of social spending and has a strong sense of the role of the government in making for a better life for the citizenry. And I think that the consolidated left governments of the Southern Cone are very much in that social democratic tradition of Europe. And then you have a different phenomenon that's represented by Hugo Chavez in Venezuela or Evo Morales in Bolivia, Rafael Correa in Ecuador, that is a populist left that emerges from the collapse of political institutions and the implosion, if you will, of the political system, and governs with the idea that they're representing the disenfranchised masses, but also engage in certain forms of authoritarian control and with a real disrespect for the norms of liberal democracy, which is not at all the case among the left in the Southern Cone.
Well, let's talk. The question that is begged here is why he won. You had a popular outgoing president who was tied to a very different political movement. You have a prosperous country, relatively speaking, certainly a country that has been doing better than many in the region. You've had a complete break from the days of Pinochet and a country that has stressed human rights and gotten far away from those dark days. And so now, what is this turn about? You would think people would be happy with the status quo. Apparently they weren't. They wanted something different.
Sure. Well, it is paradoxical that the government that I think was the most popular in Chilean history was not able to bring its own coalition into power for another presidential term. Michelle Bachelet has 80% approval ratings. Those are not only the highest in the history of the Concertación since it came into power in 1990, but really I think in the history of,
and it hasn't lost since
Chilean
it came into power.
Democracy, and it has not lost. And I think the main explanation has to do with the way the Concertación identified the next candidate to succeed Michelle Bachelet. There was not really a process of open primaries.
So voter revolt against having someone spoon-fed to them or forced upon them?
I think so, and I think that it was seen, the candidate who emerged was a former president from the Christian Democratic Party, Eduardo Frei, and it was seen very much as a throwback to the past rather than as the person who could take Chile into the future. And I think that Sebastián Piñera was very successful in saying that he was the candidate of change, but he was not looking to undo the very things that you were just talking about. I mean, the high levels of, the improvements in levels of poverty, the social safety networks that have been established in the many decades of the Concertación. So he was able to present himself in a new way, as Leonardo had mentioned, as having broken with the dictatorial past. There was a breakaway candidate in protest of the way the Concertación was not allowing a sort of circulation of new blood from below, of a younger generation. Instead, it was the same sort of alternation among the older
What does
types.
this do to that coalition? Does it just learn a lesson and move on, or does this permanently damage its political power?
Well, there's going to be a lot of soul-searching, I think, within the Concertación, and there will be, I think, some ways in which it will move to the left and will be fragmented. And then the question is what's going to happen in 4 years when there's another presidential election. Will it be able to pull back together to present a unified and credible alternative to Piñera?
Now, if you're President Lula watching from Brazil and preparing for a transition, what does this say about a popular president being able to pass on that popularity to a designated successor?
Well, Brazil right now faces exactly the same problem that the Bachelet faced in Chile a year ago, because Lula is a very popular president, but he has not been able to gather together all his support into one coalition. Exactly the same problem that Bachelet faced in Chile. So one of the reasons why Concertación lost, and I agree with Cindy, is because it did not choose the right candidate. But there is also a second reason. They split among themselves in the first round, and then they could not really gather well together in the second
What was
round.
the nature of the split? What they split over the choice of the candidate, or
they split? Well, Concertación has a lot to do with Chilean history, in the sense that the groups that we see inside Concertación are exactly the groups that could not get together before 1973 and the authoritarian coup. On the one hand, we have the Christian Democrats. On the other hand, the Socialists. And after authoritarianism, they learned their lesson. And they learned their lesson in the sense that they needed to come together in order to move Chile away from authoritarianism, in order to make the country recover some of its social policies. And in this sense, I think Concertación did very well in the last 20 years. But every time that Concertación needed to choose the presidential candidate, there were splits inside the coalition. Why? Because in fact, the Concertación involves different traditions. And one of the key issues was really if Eduardo Frei really represented well Bachelet and Lagos, that were much more on the left or towards the left than Eduardo Frei is. Eduardo Frei expresses well the beginning of Concertación in the 90s, when the governments had, by definition, to be more conservative. But after Lagos and after Bachelet, I think that the left sectors within Concertación were not happy at all with the indication of Eduardo Frei. So there was a split, and Lula, I think that he's very much concerned that perhaps the outcome of the Brazilian election would be something similar to what happened in Chile, because there is the likelihood that Lula's field of support will run in this year's election with 3 candidates.
Now, the residual structure of the Pinochet regime is still in place to some regard, as far as some of the politicians within the country. Will the new president, Will Sebastián Piñera, bring together? He's talked about a coalition government that would have people he agrees with, people he disagrees with. Will people that were sympathetic to Pinochet be back at the table?
I think he's pledged that there would not be people that were members of the Pinochet government, you know, in his cabinet.
I thought recently he made some statements that sort of moderated that that claim that he would not, under any circumstance.
Well, I think it will depend, you know, the kind of role that that someone played, you know, during the dictatorship. Piñera is the son of a prominent Christian Democrat. He comes from a Christian Democratic family. He's not, you know, a Pinochetista. He participated in demonstrations against Pinochet, and so he really does not represent that aspect of Chilean politics.
Some of his supporters.
He does, exactly. There are about 1/3 of the seats in the current Congress that are held by a right-wing party that he will have to negotiate with. But I think the sense is, at least initially, now that the center-right has come to power in Chile, that those forces of the UDI, will not really want to upset or, you know, rock the boat, and will attempt to make his government successful, at least initially. I'd like to also just correct something that I said a minute ago. Piñera cannot run again. A representative of his coalition can. He can sit out a term and then come back, but he cannot succeed himself.
Terms, right.
Exactly.
You know, some observers have said that this election of this right-wing billionaire is not an anomaly. It's a reflection of the new Latin America, sort of the slow, steady drift to the center. Here's what the New York Times said: less a signal of a regional move right than a pragmatic convergence of left and right agendas. Is that an accurate depiction of what's happening regionally?
Well, again, I think we need to separate parts of Latin America and cases. I would say that in Southern Cone, particularly in Chile, Uruguay, and Brazil, we are seeing a new phenomenon that it's some sort of overlapping between left and conservative agendas. Brazil is clearly the case. Lula, when he came to power, there were some people would think that he would change completely economic policies, try to restate state control over some of the privatized companies of the Cardoso era. None of this has happened in Brazil. And what Lula did is a continuation of some of Cardoso's economic policies together with more social policies. In this sense, Lula's government resembles very much the first Concertación governments, Aluin and Freire, in the beginning of the 90s in Chile. So what I think is that in a part of South America, there is clearly a democratic consolidation in which we see left and right not disassembling what each other has accomplished, but collaborating and seeing the political system as one coherent whole of political conceptions.
How is Piñera's election viewed by his contemporaries in other countries? Is this seen as a positive development, a wait and see? How does he come to the table initially as the chief foreign policy representative of his country?
Well, I think that for the most part, people who look at the health of democracies know that an alternation is healthy for a democratic system, and the Concertación has been in power for 20 years, and that even if this is not good, say, for the Concertación or its supporters, that it is good over time for Chilean democracy. And I think that throughout the region, the way the Chilean election is viewed very much depends on the political coloration or orientation of the particular government. It's certainly not welcomed by you know, Chavez in Venezuela or members of the populist left. But I think that people are looking very closely to try to discern, the lessons. The problem, with the Concertación was really its failure to allow this renewal, this change of generations, the coming to power of new faces and new people, and that's why this third candidate, Enrique Zominami, split from the Concertación and ran in the first round and drew off some percentage of the Frey supporters. And then in the final round between Frey and Piñera, Enrique Zominami really only very, very late in the game was willing to endorse the Frey candidacy, and a lot of his supporters split and went in different directions.
Even with that, a very close election, roughly 48, 52%,
exactly.
and that's of the half of people who voted, who could have voted.
Exactly. And Frey did very well in the rural areas. He won the rural areas for the most part, and Piñera won in the cities. One thing, though, I think we have to keep in mind is that is also, I think, a long-term problem for Chilean democracy is that, fewer and fewer people are voting, and fewer young people are registering to vote and then voting. And so the percentage of the potential voting age population that actually participates has declined over time. And this is something that I think politicians from across the spectrum are going to have to address.
Is the type of mounting apathy, is that a fair description, political apathy that Cindy just described in Chile, is that a regional phenomena or is that uneven across the region, country by country? I mean, it sounds a lot like the unfortunate state of affairs here in the United States when it comes to voting patterns.
Well, I would say that Latin America is passing more through a crisis of representation than a crisis of apathy, in the sense that we see mobilization in most of the countries. Also in Latin America, Chile is one of the few countries in which voting is non-mandatory. Most of the South American countries, voting is mandatory, so it's difficult to connect apathy with absenteeism in the polls. But what I would say is that in most of Latin America, what people are really concerned is the crisis of representation, whether political parties represent, in fact, groups, whether political parties are elected and immediately switch their agendas to something else. These are the main phenomena more than apathy.
Can we talk a bit about the United States' role in the region and its popularity or lack thereof, country by country? What is the general standing of the U.S. right now, and how does this election, what does this say about the future of U.S. relations in the region and with Chile in particular?
Well, I think that, as a person, and Leonardo can correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, in the region, Barack Obama is extremely popular as an individual.
So that Obama effect...
The Obama effect, I think, continues. That said, I think there's been a fair amount of disillusionment with the actual practice of U.S. policy in the region. And there were very few people that thought that Latin America, would be a priority for this administration, recognizing the depth of the economic crisis in the country and the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. That said, there was a very strong commitment initially articulated at the Summit of the Americas last April to work together in a multilateral fashion, to listen, to not pretend that we had all the answers. And there were two particular episodes, I think, in which the process was very, very flawed, as well as the actual content of policy. One was with the agreement with the Colombian government to have formal U.S. access to military bases in Colombia, something which was widely criticized in the region, not only by the populist left, but also by the governments of Brazil and Chile and other countries that you would have thought would have a more neutral or positive attitude toward the United States. The other was, the break that the United States made with the hemispheric consensus over Honduras, there was a. When people look back over this past year, they look, I think, at those two things as a way that the practice and the rhetoric did not necessarily match. And that said, I think the Obama administration, like many governments in the region, was taking a very pragmatic approach. And there were also ways in which it was on automatic pilot, that things that had been set in motion under the Bush administration continued. And I think the policy toward Colombia is a good representation of that.
Leonardo, Cindy mentions this American problem. I'm not sure if it's exclusively American, but sort of the narrow casting, only being able to focus on a couple countries or a couple issues at a time. And now with such a full plate in other regions of the world, perhaps the United States isn't paying close enough attention to its neighbors. So tell us, what do Americans need to know about things that are happening in Latin America, whether they're political trends, events, things that Americans are probably underinformed on that they should know more about? And I know that's a big question to ask you with a couple minutes remaining.
I think that the first issue that Americans should have in mind is that Latin America changed a lot in the last 20, 25 years. After democratization of most of the countries, the region is a different region. Democracy is really consolidated in a large part of the region. Inequality is decreasing in the region. And Latin America has governments that really stand by themselves. So the idea that Latin America would automatically align itself with the U.S. is something that's no longer taking place. And I think that this is one of the big changes in between the Bush and the Obama administration. When Obama met Lula for the first time and he asked, what Brazil wants from me? We want to respect and want to be considered on an equal basis. So I think that this is what really changing. I think that the Honduras case and a few other recent cases in Latin America also show some maturity in the sense that the region no longer accepts military coups. The region thinks and always is has been very important in this regard in not accepting and even expelling countries from the organization in the case of authoritarian coups. So in this case, I think that the region wants the U.S. to be a partner on equal terms and join the region in some of its main concerns. I also think, and I completely agree with Cindy, Obama is highly popular in Latin America. Obama is highly respected in Latin America. And I think that the region also saw very well the rapid U.S. reaction to the disaster in Haiti. That the U.S. is not just the country which is there in the case that it needs support, but it can also help and see itself present in cases that humanitarian cases, human rights cases, and other kind of cases. So I think that the Obama administration move towards helping Haiti has been very well seen in the region.
Well, we're out of time for the discussion other than a few pieces of business I have to conduct. One is, I mentioned earlier to you that Leonardo was here today for a book event that Cindy and the Latin American program sponsored, and it was to present this book, Participatory Institutions in Democratic Brazil, and this book is now available. And also, Cindy, we should mention to viewers that the way they can get more information about your upcoming events is via the Wilson Center website, www.wilsoncenter.org. Thanks to both of you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
In addition to thanking our guests, we want you to know that we appreciate your comments and encourage you to share them with us. And you can do so by sending email to dialogue@wilsoncenter.org. And as I mentioned, to learn more about the Wilson Center's Latin American program and all of its programs, please visit us on the web at wilsoncenter.org. Until next week, for all of us at the Wilson Center and Dialogue, I'm John Molesky. Thanks for watching.
Dialogue is a co-production of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars and MHZ Networks. Dialogue is available via broadcast, cable, satellite, and telco on MHZ Worldview throughout the United States. To see how to watch where you live, visit www.mhznetworks.org.